Welcome everyone to Wednesday Night at the Lab. I'm Tom Zinnan. I work here at the UW-Madison Biotechnology Center. I also work for the Wisconsin 4-H program, which is part of the Division of Extension here at UW-Madison as of 3 days ago. And on behalf of those folks and our other co-organizers, Wisconsin Public Television, the Wisconsin Alumni Association, and the UW-Madison Science Alliance, thanks again for coming to Wednesday Night at the Lab. We do this every Wednesday night, 50 times a year. Tonight, it's my pleasure to welcome back to Wednesday Night at the Lab David Perrodin. He's with Viterbo University, and he'll be talking with us about school safety in America, rhetoric versus reality. David was born in Wausau, Wisconsin, and graduated from Marathon High School in Marathon, Wisconsin. And then he went to UW-Stevens Point, where he studied speech and language pathology. He got both a bachelor's degree there and a master's degree at Point. And then he got a master's degree in education at UW-Superior. Then he came to UW-Madison to get his PhD in educational leadership and policy analysis. He promotes a safety initiative of taking action before disaster strikes. He's an author, researcher, professor, legal expert, witness, consultant, and the host of the Safety Doc podcast. While he was here getting his PhD, he researched high-stakes safety decisions in education, healthcare, and the military. He was here at Wednesday Night at the Lab back in 2013. And since then, he wrote and directed a film about school safety with Pulitzer Prize winner David Obst. His book, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, challenges the unchecked expansion of school fortification and hyper-realistic drills and questions the realized benefit of interagency collaboration during a sentinel event. I think a sentinel event might be something like what happened to those of us who were at Shake the Lake last Saturday night. I was there, but left before the shots rang out. I'm kind of glad that my son and I weren't there for that. The videos were plenty. Please join me in welcoming David Perrodin back to Wednesday Night at the Lab.
Thank you, Tom, for welcoming me back to Wednesday Night at the Lab, and I'm glad to be back. It's great to be here. We're going to focus on school safety rhetoric versus reality and kind of what's changed in that narrative since I was here in 2013. I do have a podcast, a Safety Doc podcast with more than 100 episodes focusing on school and community safety, and also my book, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, with an outstanding foreword by actor Danny Woodburn. When I presented in 2013, it was school statistics, the history of school attacks, school shooters situations, and crisis preparedness and response. But since my presentation, we have sustained the frequency of school violence incidents. We've had Parkland, Santa Fe, Highlands. So what's going on? I will discuss rhetoric, accountability, school safety, industrial complex, fortification, student mental health paradox, teaching students about safety, a recently developed threat to school safety, optimism, and reality. What is rhetoric? It's persuasion, it's discourse, it's what people say about school safety, but it's not necessarily anchored to research or data. This is what we'll read about in the newspapers, we'll hear about on the radio, we'll see on our social media feeds. Schools can fortify their way to safety. School safety is steadfastly monitored and regulated. Student health mental services make schools safer. There is a profile of a student attacker. Limiting students' experiences makes them safer. K-12 education in America, every day, 55 million students attend more than 140,000 public and private school buildings. But we also need to consider that we have community preschool sites, thousands of portable classrooms, and also students taking online courses. When I bring that up, when I do safety consulting, people say, oh, we didn't include those students in our safety plans. They often get overlooked in the narrative of safety. So who's in charge of school safety? Initially, you would think it's the federal government, but actually the federal government is terrific at giving recommendations about school safety. It is the state which creates the laws and the regulations. And the school districts then interpret and implement those laws and regulations. 43 out of 50 states require that schools have safety plans and do safety drills. So 43 out of 50, you're wondering, who are the 7 states? Well, Wisconsin is not in that group of 7, and I'm not going to identify those states right now, but hopefully after watching this, they're going to get on board and we're going to have 50 out of 50. But site-based discretion comes into play because we have school districts, and the way school districts operate is they typically embrace site-based discretion, meaning that the principals are in charge of interpreting school safety, how it should be implemented in their buildings. And that makes sense because the buildings are different, the populations are different, elementary, middle, and high. In Wisconsin, we have 421 school districts, 2,216 school buildings, so safety looks significantly different from building to building, even within the same school district. Before 2017, the only form that needed to be submitted to indicate that you were compliant as a school district with school safety was this one form right here to the Wisconsin Department of Safety and Professional Services. This is completely inadequate. What day did you do the drill? How many people participated? There aren't learning objectives. This is just a checklist activity. Most states still do this, or they don't even come to this level. Something had to change, and it did. We had Act 143 came about. Wisconsin Act 143, Department of Justice, 2017 to present. So now the DOJ has taken over school safety in Wisconsin, and we've had big changes. Schools are required to submit their blueprints to the DOJ, safety plans, safety training records, and also conduct an annual drill in the proper response to a school violence event, and then produce a summary for the school board. But this is subjective because what is a proper response to a school violent event? Districts will go and do large, full-scale exercises to meet this requirement. Other districts will not go to that extent. So we still have some subjective interpretive nature in this, but the DOJ stepped forward and elevated Wisconsin notably on the national scene for school safety. School safety is a $3 billion industrial complex. And when we look at the dollars that get encumbered under school referendums across the United States, that number's closer to $5 billion. That's different than when I was here in 2013. The school safety industrial complex did not exist back then. So the majority of dollars are being spent on fortifications, a smaller portion, student mental health, training staff, and also providing mental health services. And we have a sliver. We have a small sliver right here. Well, there is a sliver. It's safety research. It's less than 1%. You'd have to slice it, and it's even less than that. I mean, we get down to such a small part of safety research. So we're treating direct causes. We're not getting at root causes. We keep funding fortifications, and this is snowballing. A rise in school security. The middle line indicates surveillance cameras being sold, and that has become a very robust industry. The top is fortified entrances. Actually, the bottom line, which has stayed flat, metal detectors for some reason, that hasn't caught on. But we're talking millions and millions of dollars that are going into these types of devices. And the question, are they making schools safer? And empirically, we know we're not seeing a decrease in the frequency of school shootings and school attacks. The Youth Code of Silence. Well, we've known about this for 30 years, and we've known it's been widely published for 20 years since the 1999 Columbine attack, where prior to most attacks, somebody else knew that the attack was going to happen. At least one other person, but multiple. In Bethel, Alaska, in 1997, there were more than 20 students assembled on a mezzanine who showed up to watch the school shooting. But so they didn't tell an adult. Now, threat detection, the most important part of your threat detection isn't $3 billion worth of devices that you're putting in schools, it's your students. And we are not researching, we're not putting the investment into breaking the youth code of silence. When establishing a threat assessment, we have to make sure we do not profile a student attacker. There is not a profile. Students who have been high academic achievers, low academic achievers, loners, have had friends, have identified as being bullied, identified as not being the recipient of bullying. But we tend to put this profile together in the rhetoric and the narrative of it's somebody that's been bullied, it's somebody who probably dressed in black and goth and was into Kiss-type music. Well, if that was the case, half of my class in middle school would have been on a watch list because, that's just the way that it was. And we have to be very vigilant because there are bills on the horizon in some states to allow teachers to potentially profile who they think the next school shooter could be. That's terrifying. Again, since 2013, we've been on a pace of 400 safety bills proposed by the states per year, and about 80 of those get enacted. And that stayed pretty constant. So we can see where the bills get enacted, the funding usually follows. We have the $3 billion industry, and something is different though this year. Something is different in 2019. Through April 25th, 257 bills were proposed. This will be a record-setting year for the number of bills proposed and the number of bills passed, and it's not slowing down anytime soon. The counter-argument to this is we have to reach saturation at some point, right? We can only put so many cameras in and so many bullet-resistive doors and things like that, but there's always something else that you can sell, or an update or an upgrade, or a second fence outside of the first fence. And believe me, these things are marketed, and there's a new app. We're going to see some things today that I never thought I would see as a veteran in the safety profession. So we go back to 2018. The Department of Justice awarded $100 million in grants for school safety enhancements. Impacted 600 public and private schools in Wisconsin, part of Act 143. Fortifications, mental health and threat assessment training, and also mental health community partnerships, or working with clinics and hospitals so they might be able to train school staff and also work with students identified with mental health needs in the school setting. The Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction has some similar grants to put together school-based mental health services. They expire in 2021. But there's an inherent problem with grant funding. Grant funding expires. You have to sustain whatever initiative is that you put together with grant funding. So with the DOJ dollars, the $100 million, if it's a device that you purchased, you're responsible for maintaining that device. You can't contact DOJ and say, we bought this out of our grant money and now we need money to do an upgrade or to do maintenance to it. It's the same thing with training. Now this is huge. So if we do mental health and threat assessment training for staff, Wisconsin did a wonderful job with this in the last year or two. But we have a high turnover in teachers and also principals. Principals, 2-3 years, superintendents every 2-3 years turnover. And teachers, it's really free agency in Wisconsin after Act 10, meaning teachers go from district to district and also burnout. So you have to have an induction process for the people coming in, and schools don't have that. So this will fade. The impact of the trainings will fade because it's just not sustainable. Anybody can become a school safety expert. Arguably, you could leave here today, print this slide off, and put your name on it, and you could be a school safety expert. It is vendors, marketers taking advantage of this because no certification, license, registration, permit, nothing. So schools are confused. They get approached by a vendor, and they assume this vendor has expertise in the area of safety, and the vendor probably doesn't have a great depth of expertise generally in assessing the needs of the district. Now the vendor knows the vendor catalog, knows what the vendor can sell you, but as far as a needs assessment, No. So this has really clouded and fogged school safety across the country. I wrote in my book, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, that I recommend schools go right to their insurance carriers and ask their insurance carriers to come in and send someone to do a risk assessment for the facility. I think that's an authentic way to find someone who would meet what I would say is a robust set of criteria for school safety expert. Customer perceived value. It's a marketing term, but it applies to schools right now. The customer is the parent. This is obvious. The customer is the parent. When the perceived value is increased student safety, it's practically unthinkable to assign a price tag to peace of mind. The moment you do this, you can justify anything. If I come in and I sell this and I say this device right here can detect a gunshot, or this device can do some other magical thing, you need to have it, they're probably going to purchase it, especially if I'm a good salesperson. I think it probably would be. But again, it's peace of mind lead to decisions to fuel this $3 to $5 billion school safety industry using peace of mind. We're going to see some really stretched examples of where peace of mind came into play in some school safety decisions. But remember, the customer is the parent, and the perceived values increase student safety. You're going to spend those dollars. A school administrator. So with Viterbo University, I teach legal issues for school superintendents and also special education law for aspiring special education directors. And I've done that for 16 years. I'm very proud to be a faculty member with Viterbo University and working with administrators. So I stay in contact with what's happening around the state. I have I have a number of inputs of telling me what's happening in the state of Wisconsin, including my national work. A school administrator shared with me, said, David, parents in the community want to see safety. This is the reason we've put a ring of new fencing around our school complex, but our PA systems aren't heard in all parts of our building. So there's a fundamental flaw in that, because let's think of an intruder situation. If somebody is unable to hear that announcement being made, they can't get to a safe area, or tornado, or some other announcement that would be made. So this whole thing comes into a needs assessment, a prioritization matrix. But again, vendors come in and they tell schools what they want to hear and not what they need to hear. That's a big difference, what you want to hear and what you need to hear. And again, schools have allowed the vendors to become the experts. Looking externally for the answers. Schools want something that they can purchase. And I'll have an example of that later. When I work with schools, I have nothing to sell them outside of my staff training and the expertise that hopefully I can impart into their systems. I don't have any device, anything in a box that is going to magically make their school safer. That's just a myth also. And we have so much house money right now through the form of grants, 257 bills through April 25th. The dollars are flowing in. The vendors and marketers are going after it. They're going after the schools. They're taking advantage of panicked parents and superintendents who feel the stress. Superintendents will also say to me, Dave, if I don't go along with this, I might not be renewed. I might not have a job here next year. Then I have to up my family and I have to go somewhere else. And I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go with it, even though I know it's not the right thing as far as our needs. Maybe our two-way radios are a higher priority, but this is what the board wants. And people want to see safety. School safety devices aren't required to undergo any research trials or be certified. So a school district might buy an app because 300 other schools in the state use it. It's saturation. You're convincing people upon saturation. Just because a lot of people use it doesn't mean that it's effective. And saturation is not the same as effectiveness, but it is very effective to use it as a marketing technique of coming in and saying, 8 districts around you use this app. Why don't you use it? And they give in to the pressure. NBC 15, February 21st, 2018. Somerset High School in Wisconsin, senior Justin Rivard invented a tool he calls the just in case. He made this in shop class in school. Has steel plates, connecting rods, and it fits under a door's jamb. With it in place, Rivard has said, if high school football players have charged into the door, it's held with my device in place. Okay, so taking initiative, I have to commend him for that, but here's the device. These images were taken off of Amazon. It's marketed right now on Amazon. He has some other versions of it, but it slides under a door. I'm not sure how it fully works, but so here's what happened. So he develops this. The school buys 50 of them. And the principal said, we start at the high school, then we went to the middle school, then we went to the elementary school. So we have a very, very small amount of time between something that gets invented by someone who's not an engineer, this is a high school student, and the school buys it. So who's liable for this? What's the scientific method to say that this works across all different settings? And what if somebody uses this to lock students into a room and you can't get in from the outside? I mean, those scenarios for these types of devices. Now, I will say, I'm not making any claim about the quality of Justin Rivard's product. I'm just pointing out here that we go from conception to actually creating and marketing products in a very small amount of time. We don't have the scientific method at all, so some of the things are going to be effective for what they're marketed for, and some of the things aren't. This is the bulletproof igloo. I never thought I would see a bulletproof igloo. And this is in Oklahoma where it doesn't even get that cold, but it is the bulletproof igloo. Paul Hunter from CBC, Canadian News, came down to check this thing out. This is a couple weeks ago, folks. This bulletproof igloo right here. This is a few weeks ago. It can accommodate up to 30 people. I'm sure it takes in a lot of room in your class to do this, but this is, yeah. So the thought is, if there was an intruder, you could get 30 people inside of here, seal this up, and they would be safe from the intruder. So here's how they made the decision to purchase the bulletproof igloo. The school superintendent went inside of an igloo that was outside, and this is what he said. AR-15s, 9mm, 380s, full metal jackets, they unloaded on us, and they enjoyed it. It was a surreal feeling. The $30,000 price tag unit is a fair price for peace of mind, he said. The feedback from parents has been wonderful. He purchased 7 units. I think they purchased 2 more, actually, in the last week. So, wow. So peace of mind, the feedback from parents. The parent is the customer. If the product can provide peace of mind, it's purchased. $210,000. Now, all of the logistics that would have to play out for a scenario when this would actually be applicable in a school intruder situation are numerous. And also, what's the status of your public address system? Can your intruder announcement be heard all parts of your building? But we see these types of things. And imagine, it's theater. It's on YouTube. It's people watching as the superintendent probably goes into this igloo, and then people start shooting at him or shooting at this igloo. But then once you walk out, how do you not buy that product? How do you not say, yes, we're going to spend the money on this because if anything happens and we can get our kids into one of these and there's an intruder with a gun in the building, they'll be safe. Wow. I never thought I'd see this. This is an elementary school in Wisconsin that uses Department of Justice dollars to put in the yellow bollards in the front, which you can't miss. So somebody could not drive a vehicle into the front of a building. That's not how schools are attacked. The odds of somebody doing this are 1 in 2 million. Not that there would be an injury or fatality, 1 in 2 million. We know that this isn't the way that schools are attacked. But what does this convey? You look at this and it's like, that's safety. Those 2 tusks right there, those 2 yellow tusks, that's safety. Parents can see that. They can go up and tap it. They can kick it if they want. It's not going anywhere. It is probably going to stop a vehicle. If somebody charges a vehicle toward it, it would probably do that. But you have winter in Wisconsin, and you have to shovel around these. And you can tell on either side of them, those are permanent benches. So if you have a wheelchair, you've got one shot down the middle, and you better be accurate. So we have ICE that develops things like that. This makes sense in a district that I know has needs for a public address system, that I know, in talking with the superintendent, also has needs for induction of staff at 4K sites, in a discussion I had less than 1 week ago. Why do we see this? It's visible. People want to see it. People want to touch it. Well, we can't fortify our way to safety. This doesn't work. In 2014, a New Jersey teenager went to the World Trade Center as it was being completed. He took what was available to him. He worked his way through some holes and fences, and he went through some open doors, some unsupervised stairwells. He worked his way up to the top, and he watched the sunrise, which sounds pretty awesome. I'm afraid of heights. It wouldn't be for me, but every day curiosity seekers are foiling our most secured venues. And I have hundreds of examples just like this. Student mental health. We hear this in the same sentence as school safety. We need to increase school safety. We need to increase student mental health. We have a definition paradox, though, with student mental health. How do you define it in children? The American Psychiatric Association has what's called the DSM-5. It's the book of medical mental disorder diagnoses. 957 pages long. So this is where you buy my book first, which is 204 pages. It's a good primer. Nonfiction, get you started, more engaging. Hundreds of diagnoses in the DSM-5. You can diagnose anything. The number one diagnosis is generalized anxiety disorder for children. It has been for a number of years, but then we have depression, suicidal ideation, and just a few. But it's not that you get one single diagnosis, it's comorbid. You might get 3 or 4 or 5 and different medications going with that. And how do you work all of this together? So we don't understand this nearly as well as what we do, what we think we do, what is portrayed in the media, the rhetoric that we have an understanding of student mental health needs. We don't. We also have an out-of-control epidemic with suicide. 15 to 19-year-olds, it's increased 33% since 2009. The blue line going down, that was the last time I presented. We can indicate suicide prevalence continues to rise. Actually, it's everywhere. Male, female, it doesn't matter what age you are. It's across demographics in the United States. So this is huge. Our number 2 cause of death for children is suicide. You know, if we're looking at age 18 and under. Number 1 cause, accidental death, mostly vehicular accidents or overdoses. And of course, I had to include this slide because it's so significant since 2013 when I was here, again, the line going up. Accidental death, or leading cause of death right now with kids is opioid overdose. That combined again with car accidents contributes to accidental death. So the whole landscape of school safety has changed. So we hear about intruders and you know, that we have to fortify and all of that, and yet we have this opioid epidemic is just crazy right now in schools. It's not slowing down. Mental health legislation. Well, we said the feds recommend. They do a great job at recommending, right? But we had a chance. We had one chance. March 3rd, 2015, there were bills simultaneously introduced to the House and Senate. The Mental Health in Schools Act. It would have required a framework for mental health services in schools, funding, staff development, training staff, or training family members, which was great because now we get family members, we get a wraparound support. Expanding successful evidence-based programs. Here's where the research dollars come in. It had overwhelming support. It was never enacted. So we do not have a federal framework for student mental health. There's nothing on the horizon. We had a chance. It never happened. So states don't require mental health screenings for individual students. They will give anonymous group surveys to high school students, middle school students, and they might find out, for example, in the last 90 days, 12% of our high school students indicated that they considered harm to self. Okay, but what value is that? If we don't know the students who responded to that, how do we produce a response to that benefits those students? So this kind of just gives a general barometer of where things are at, but it doesn't really help us with putting together treatment plans. Teachers observe, but teachers don't diagnose. We have to remember, educator licenses do not allow for medical evaluation, medical diagnoses, or medical treatment. Teachers can describe the behaviors that they've observed, that they've noticed, but they can't, however, say this student has depression, ADHD, anxiety, or mental illness. School-based mental health services. Since 2013, youth mental health first aid training has been provided for a lot of school districts. At 2018, $100 million from DOJ. A lot of those dollars went into youth mental health first aid. That's a formal program. It's multiple days. I participated in it. It helps staff to identify anxiety, signs of depression, signs of suicide, and then refer out to medical providers. The treatment side of this, schools can directly hire mental health providers, but of course, where are you going to get the dollars for that? Because grants are one time. You're not going to hire those folks out of a grant because they're going to want to know they have a job after the grant is encumbered and expended. So you can co-locate community mental health clinics in schools, bringing the mental health providers into schools. Works very effective with the Kimberly School District for the last 10 years. But that's a handful of districts in Wisconsin. 421 districts, a handful have programs that are this successful and have lasted this long. So the model is highly dependent upon your geographic location, which we're going to get to in just a moment. But let's step back. Wisconsin has 148 practicing child psychiatrists. Okay? That's 12 per every 100,000 or 75,000 or 75% less than the recommended level. There's not enough, and they're burning out. They're burning out. We're getting high turnover. Amy Herbst of Children's Hospital of Wisconsin quoted in an article by Chris Miller of Appleton Post-Crescent, May 22nd, 2019. Okay? She said, the wait for an appointment for a child could be weeks or months to see a mental health provider. Weeks or months. In the southern part of the state, probably weeks. Northern part of the state, probably months. So, believe it or not, I actually created this map. I'm pretty proud of myself. I was able to use Microsoft Paint to color in the 4 counties. It only took me 2 days. But we can tell we have 4 counties, Dane, Brown County, Waukesha, and Milwaukee, which are darkened in. 111 out of those 148 child psychiatrists practice in those 4 counties. That's where they're concentrated. And also, most of our population is in Dane County and Milwaukee, southern part of the state. So we have the red line going across, really roughly where Highway 29 is. Above that, we have service deserts. Service deserts. And my superintendents in those areas tell me all the time, we just don't have the providers up here. The 37 indicates child psychiatrists practicing above Highway 29, or roughly half of the state. We also have some other barriers to this. Winter weather, which starts in October if you're in Bayfield and ends in June if you're in Bayfield, right? So you have that to deal with and you don't have the infrastructure. So it's not, I don't want to portray that the southern part of the state, the situation is much better because you have more population, so you don't have to drive as far for an appointment, but you still have a wait list for an appointment. So until we do something to address this issue of service deserts, which really would probably come from a federal level bill, we're not going to get anywhere. Some districts will have some services, other districts will have nothing. And we know that there's one district in Wisconsin indicated last week that they want to dissolve their district. So what kind of services happen there? And you have to keep thinking, we go back to induction process. The districts where you have high turnover, where somebody's there for a year, they're trained in youth mental health services, they leave. In their counties, they have turnover. I worked with one county above this red line, and the county literally was training 4 or 5 people at one time, and the school was just that they had somebody left for the next year because of turnover, so they had some continuity. It's that dire out there for mental health. So Mental health looks significantly different depending upon which districts you're in, but of the 421 schools in Wisconsin, the majority are really, really struggling to put in place any mental health programs. You have key questions too. Okay, so who evaluates? Who qualifies for services? What criteria do you have to have? One superintendent told me, well, Dave, worst is first. We get everybody together, all of our principals, and we just make a list of our students, and whoever we rank as worst becomes first when we have service slots available for our provider, which drives in and sees students for 3 hours a week in our school district. Okay, so what's the best treatment? Who knows, right? We've only really worked with student mental health issues on a deep empirical level probably since the 80s, and I'll have a perfect example of that. How do we measure progress? How do we know if the student is benefiting from the service or not? Or if something ancillary is happening, they're getting more attention because they're in a club or something like that. We don't have research to specifically say this works for this presentation of need. And also discharge criteria. Again, a superintendent said, well, in our district, if somebody qualifies for mental health services, they get 8 therapy sessions with an outside provider, and then it's done. Well, it doesn't mean that the need is done. It just means that they've qualified for their 8 sessions, which the district is paid for. And if these needs continue, how do you address your wait list, which districts will say we have more and more students on our wait list because we're not discharging students. At the top, I have opt-in. Parents have to agree also to this, and if they say no, then really the school doesn't have an option. So a summary of what we know, and this will close out our mental health segment. There's no standardized protocol for defining what constitutes school-based mental health in America. We lost that opportunity with that 2015 Fed bill didn't get passed. Teachers are trained to identify and respond to signs of mental illness, but they can't diagnose children. We have insufficient empirical studies to support the efficacy of youth mental health treatments. In 1983, PBS did a documentary, Children of Darkness. You can find it, it's on YouTube. This was actually a therapy. So this was a student who was in a mental health institution in his state, not Wisconsin. Pink bunny suit shaming therapy. Actually wore a pink bunny suit for weeks, several weeks. And the thought was he would not run away from the facility in the bunny suit because he'd be embarrassed to do that. Ran away 4 times after they did that, by the way. So this whole thing with the pink bunny suit, no. But that's where we were, and actually people thought psychiatrists and mental health providers, they were experimenting. They thought that this might be effective. We're still kind of in our infancy. I mean, in 1983, like the age of the kid in the video, that was me. I was that age. I wasn't that kid, but I was that age. We have this nationwide shortage of mental health providers that only continues to increase. We have burnout. And the whole question of, have we created the stigma by commingling mental health and school services? Do you want to be identified as having received mental health services? It's a deep question because the legislation coming out now, the narrative is also, it's always school safety and mental health, school safety and mental health. The question is, does it kind of imply that if you receive mental health services that you might be at risk of bringing harm to your school? That was a big threat after Adam Lanza with Sandy Hook for about 2 weeks. Parents who had children with autism were very afraid that their children were going to start to be profiled as potentially being at risk to bring harm to their fellow students. That didn't happen, and it's not authentic, but that could happen. But for about 2 weeks, there were articles in the media that were circling. So you also open up this question, have you ever been treated for a mental health condition? So if you say, yeah, when I was 15 years old, I had a mental health treatment for anxiety when I was in school. So is that a fair question? Well, no, it's not a fair question. It becomes a lifetime scarlet letter. If you're applying to be in law enforcement, a doctor, a pilot, that question will get asked. And personal privacy is also an authentic concern. I work with some of the top folks in the intelligence community, and my goodness, data hacks, what we know about is the tip of the iceberg. But how many times do you open up a letter and it's like, oh, your data from whatever was just compromised again? The parents are saying, what if somebody finds out that my child, when they were 15 years old, received services for anxiety. How will that impact them down the road? So we have some very authentic concerns. Oh, okay. All right. Pink bunny suit. It didn't work for Ralphie either. Aunt Clara gave him that suit, and he has to wear it every time she visits to this day. But it's ironic. That was the same year, 1983. So we have the bunny suit in Children of Darkness and the bunny suit in A Christmas Story. Teaching safety to students. The collapsing roaming range. 100 years ago, the typical 8-year-old had 30 miles that they could traverse. Woods, streams, having fun. Now, it is less than a mile. That's a study by David Derbyshire. Less than a mile. Talk about this, write about this in my book. Exploration is a type of safety exercise, and we've just taken it away from kids because we don't let them explore. You go 300 yards to the end of your block, and that's it. We're losing in vivo experiences, real-world, in-world experiences. Here's an example. In 2017, Ohio's North Ridgeville City Schools canceled the 8th grade field trip to D.C. over threats of terrorism. There were no threats of terrorism at that time. They were just feeding off of the rhetoric. And they said, no, we don't want this to happen. We don't want our kids to go there. And the superintendent said, well, we've done this for years, and there's a program where they meet us over there, and this is okay. But we have an irony, right? We have an irony. Founding fathers embraced peril, and 242 years later, their heirs won't allow their kids to go to the Smithsonian to see the muskets. But here's the replacement. Here's prize B. Virtual reality field trip. Everybody, today we're going to the gym. And you're going to get your VR goggles. We contracted with a company who just sold us the DC trip. And you're going to get it in the gym. And this happened. And this happens. Here's why it's marketed so successfully. 15, 20 years ago, if you had this technology, you can market it and say, it's cost effective. You don't have to spend gas to DC. You don't have to do lodging and all of that. That would make sense, right? But it's marketed now as school safety. We can keep your kids safe if they never leave the building. And you experience it through the eyes of somebody else. Carol, your tour guide. Positionality, maybe one person, instead of 40 kids individually experiencing Washington, D.C. And a superintendent said, we did this trip, and one of the kids had his wallet pickpocketed, and he said it was a learning experience and things like that. But he said, overall, they had a great time on the trip, and not kids, small groups of kids learning. But yeah, this was all wiped out. So yeah, this isn't the field trip of the future. This is the field trip of right now for panicked parents who are the customers who want peace of mind. Hyper-realistic intruder full-scale exercises have become very popular and controversial. Have they gone too far? And are we focused too much on one crisis? This is when fire, ambulance, police set up at a school and basically simulate as if a shooter had been there. So people will have simulated gunshot wounds. They'll do the med flight choppers coming in. They'll run through the school looking for shooters. I saw one where they put people in body bags and lined them up outside of the school, all announced in the local newspaper so anybody could participate. You could play any role you wanted, right? Wow. Your odds of dying, lifetime likelihood of dying in a school shooting is 1 in 2 million. Lifetime likelihood of dying from a lightning strike is 1 in 218,000. I could run a ton of statistics similar to this, but again, when we're out of whack with prevalence. So if we look at the $100 million from DOJ, if we look at the $3 billion school safety industry, they're not selling you lightning strike detectors that you can put on your ball fields and your playgrounds, which might make sense statistically. Some of those things were marketed short-term after some localized events a number of years ago. But we're preying on fear. We're preying on panicked parents. In January of 2019, this made the news everywhere. Some Indiana elementary school teachers were shot execution style with plastic pellets and injured during an active shooter training. The sheriff said, hey, we're going to stop doing these active shooter trainings. Well, you don't stop doing the trainings. You just don't try to execute people during your trainings. You improve your training. You put learning objectives to it. You just don't shut it down. And parents and teachers are now exempting some students from drills. I spoke with James Sibley, who's an attorney out of San Jose, has a son with autism. And he said, yeah, this is becoming an authentic issue right now because of the trauma that students have inflicted upon them by these hyper-realistic drills. Wall Street's Dan Frosch, if you want to do some reading, has curated a list of all litigation in this area. But let's think about this, okay? If painting kids up with fake blood, role-playing as a gunshot victim and firing blank rounds inside a school was the gold standard, why don't we pump smoke into schools to simulate fire for every fire drill? Why don't we fire up the old barn fan and throw those rubber pellets in it to simulate a tornado? And there'd be some basis for doing a hyper-realistic full exercise tornado drill because, well, June 8th, 1984, Barneville, Wisconsin, during the night an F5 tornado struck, destroyed 90% of the community, 9 fatalities, 100 injuries of the city's 600 residents. Where's Barneville? It's 25 minutes from right here. Barneville is 25 minutes from right here. Since 2017, 15 students have died when their schools have been ripped apart by tornadoes. But we don't bring in the drama club when we're doing tornado drills. We only save that for the intruder drills. I argue that if it wouldn't pass institutional review board, then we shouldn't do this. And this is what I instruct my students at Viterbo. Institutional review board is something that universities have for research. It came about in 1974, meaning you have to take into consideration the physical and psychological harm of your subjects doing research to make sure that you weren't bringing harm to them. We had some pretty wild research experiments going on. 1971, the Stanford prison experiment, which got so out of control they had to shut it down early. In 1963, the Milgram shock experiment. So every time somebody was getting an answer wrong, another person was told to administer a shock, and the person be yelling, "Oh, you're killing me! Like I have a heart condition. Don't do this." And they weren't actually being shocked. The actor had a light that would come on, and then they would play this. But the person didn't know. They're like, "I don't think I should be doing this," but most people did. Like virtually everybody turned the knob all the way up and zapped them. And those people got paid $4, and were never told it was an experiment, by the way. Walked away, and they're like, "I think I might have hurt somebody really bad today." But it's pizza and beer money, I guess. Here's Barneville, the morning of June 8th, 1984. Situational awareness has been compromised. We've lost roaming area. Kids spending 7 to 9 hours a day looking at their device. Walking, we have so many videos of people walking into signposts and things like that. There's also videos of people walking into traffic being killed. Less recess, fewer field outings. Today's youth have been robbed of the environmental awareness skills achieved by their predecessors. Less aware equals less safe. It doesn't matter what we spend on fortification. Less aware equals less safe. But there's ways to combat this, that we can address this, and it doesn't cost us money. In 1908, Sir Baden-Powell put together the book Scouting Games used by Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, now military scouts, also military snipers to this day. Here's a variation of how you could do this in a school setting to develop a student's capacity to observe and remember details. So you take students on a truck around the campus, and you have some things set up ahead of time. So a unicorn on a flagpole, Jingle Bells is playing by a slide, and you have a strong scent of oranges on a sidewalk. So you have visual, you have auditory, you have olfactory. You take students around, you don't tell them what to expect, but you come back and say, "What did you encounter when we did this trek around the campus?" And oftentimes they're not going to detect these things right away. You take them through the second time, you point them out, and then you do this more and more. And pretty soon they're telling you, "Yeah, 3 blocks away, the transformer on the telephone pole was humming loud. I don't think it's going to last long. Like someone should call the power company." Like they get that tuned in. It actually happens that way. It's remarkable. But we don't do this. Here's something else. This is called Kim's game. Kim's game involves just taking random things, putting them in a drawer or on a table, and trying to remember what they are. And you could either visually do this, you could feel items, so forth. You could have a song that was playing, olfactory sense, however you wanted to do this. But very simple, Kim's game. Now a sniper can remember about 200 items, But you can get a kid, a teenager, easily remembering over 50 items. And they'll not only remember the items the more you do this, they'll remember, yeah, there were 3 things made of wood. Wait, there were 4 things because a drawer was made out of wood. I'll go to schools and they'll say, this is great, Dave, we love this. How much does it cost? Like, it doesn't cost anything. Like, you just make this. If I put this in a box and I sold this for $90, they put one in every classroom. Probably stored inside their bulletproof igloo. It's safe right there. This is insane. But this is what we do. The top threat, now I said I wasn't going to profile, but I guess I violated my rule here. Michaela Sosa is our top threat to school safety. This is huge. This is huge. Michaela Sosa. So, well, she looks the part, right? I mean, come on. She looks the part of your top threat to school safety. Chess club, yearbook, varsity, Spanish, National Honor Society, Glee Club. The Glee Club thing kind of seals it, right? Mm-hmm. So here's some other photos. Look carefully. This is Michaela Sosa. Look carefully. Little Michaela's an Instagram model. She claims to be from Downey, Illinois. She's posting on Instagram since 2016. She has over 1 million social media followers. She is a fictional person. There is no Michaela Sosa. She's managed by a team of engineers, marketers, and dreamers. I have no idea what the job description is for a dreamer, but it sounds pretty awesome if this is what you get to do. She's actually used by Calvin Klein for marketing. So she is benign, but there are more than 100 avatars right now of avatar realism quality of little Michaela on the net, and they're not all benign. Katie Jones was one just weeded out, and she had ties in government infiltration. Just took her out last week. We've done something. Something has happened since 2011. We've crossed this uncanny valley. In 1970, robotics professor Masahiro Mori identified the closer robots looked like humans, the more humans were repulsed. They didn't feel comfortable with them, so he always kept a little bit of difference in the design. We also see that in movies like The Incredibles were designed angular for this reason. The movie The Polar Express in 2004 tried to cross the uncanny valley, wasn't successful. You'll read a number of reviews where kids left the theater. They felt very uncomfortable with that movie. But about 2011, we got to the point where we could do avatar realism. Facebook Messenger was a thing, streaming video. So suddenly, like, a little Michaela could come on board and start posting on her social media accounts, which she's done. We also had this phenomenon of replacing the meat tribe. Meat tribe, when I was growing up, probably most of you, it was people getting together. Now it's people getting together with their phones, even if they're in the same room. It's the phone tribe. It's replaced. The meat tribe will never go back. Here is how this actually manifests in large-scale rescues, and schools need to be aware of this. So in 2017, Hurricanes Irma and Harvey, Facebook Messenger. People are going to Facebook Messenger. So let's say this house up here in the right-hand corner. This person said, hey, my area is flooded out. No one's rescuing me. Most of the fire departments outside of Houston, all the small communities, had one boat. They couldn't do this. So they needed the Cajun Navy Relief to come in, which is a nonprofit organization. There were some others. They would contact them by Facebook Messenger and say, we need you to come in and help us. Then someone from Cajun Navy Relief, just typical citizens, would respond with Zello, which is an app, a free app, and they would contact these boaters. The person circled, he'd get the call saying, yeah, it's right in back of you. It's where you need to go. They need water, and they also need to be evacuated because the water's rising. So we have this whole system now, which is outside of FEMA, which is outside of 911, and these systems are rapidly developing, these civilian rescues. And what might this look like if we have another Barneville type event? So it's just something that we're not aware of when we talk about school safety. 6 weeks ago, this is terrifying. 6 weeks ago, Samsung engineers developed realistic talking heads that can be generated from a single image. And so on the left, we have static photographs. On the right, those are all AI, artificial intelligence generated images. I want to show you a very short video clip. If I'm able to do it. All right, well.
Should be able to escape out.
Okay. All right, here we go. Sorry about that.
We can push the generalization even further, applying the system to famous photographs.
That's all manufactured.
In each case, we automatically find people in the Vox Celeb 2 dataset with landmarks suitable for the animation of a particular portrait.
That's simply terrifying. That came out of Samsung Moscow labs 6 weeks ago. You get 8 static images, you can make someone look almost realistic. For $20, you can hire somebody to do deepfakes. For $250, you or I could buy the software and probably be able to do this ourselves. And there now is full text capability, so you can make somebody say whatever you want them to say. So how are schools going to respond to these deep fakes? What's going to happen when a principal is presented a 20-second video of somebody making a threat to the school, and that person says, I never said this, but yet you have the video? So this erodes trust, and it introduced what's called the liar's dividend. Even though that student might be proven that they didn't make that video, there's going to be some doubt because it's a video, right? And were they intending to do this or not? Are they going to be on some watch list if this happens again? It will elevate social media bullying to an unimaginable level. The Ruderman Foundation last week released a white paper study indicating that bullying of students with disabilities is at an all-time high. They continue to be the most at-risk population for being the recipients of bullying. Now we throw this into the mix, and are we going to have students have to think proactively of how do you prove that you did not make this threatening statement? Your psychological well-being of students is at risk. A reputation can be ruined in minutes, and that can overwhelm a teen perhaps to suicide. Suicide is the second leading cause for youth in the United States. Check out the book, So You've Been Shamed by John Ronson, 2015. One tweet can ruin a career and a life and almost take somebody to death. June of 2019, thankfully, the U.S. lawmakers got together for a hearing devoted to the threat of artificially generated imagery. But yeah, this seems too late, right? Like right now, for just doing this, we're so far behind. We are nowhere ready for this. But we have reasons to be optimistic in schools. We do have great things happening in school safety. This is Bart Barda and his son Daniel. And Bart is a friend of mine, and he is a retired police commander. He's the father of an autistic son. Daniel has autism. He trains emergency responders how to recognize, respond, and manage risk in students with autism. He's trained officers in Wisconsin. So one of the objectives would be if you come in and you encounter a student with autism, so they would authentically have a student with autism who might flap hands, might put hands into pockets. How do you interact successfully with that student in a high-stress situation? This is a concern, yeah, because that student could be at higher risk to be could be shot at. And Attorney James Sibley, who also has a son with autism, shared this in a podcast where we talked about that. So he is doing tremendous things, but we talk about these hyper-realistic full-scale intruder drills. We need to introduce learning objectives like Bart Barda is doing. FEMA Team Cert. Ted Zacco-Hawkhalter, another friend of mine, he had 2 children at Columbine in 1999 during the shooting. His daughter was left a paraplegic from that shooting. He said to me, David, whether we like it or not, kids are stakeholders in all of this. And there's a program you should check out, FEMA Team Cert, Community Emergency Response Team. This is a great way to help kids with environmental awareness. Here, kids are learning how to do cribbing or how to lift something if it was a heavy object, if it fell on somebody. So there's some kids, there's community safety responders there. Obviously, who wouldn't want to do this? I mean, this is hands-on and generalizable skills. Embracing student focus groups. There's a technology out there right now. What 3 words? And it is emerging as the primary safety response for the Netherlands, for Sweden, also United Nations. Where I'm standing right now, this spot is achieving.land.keep. If I reported that to emergency responders, they would know to come right here to respond to me. It's like telling people, hey, David's presentation is at UW-Madison. Well, what good does that do you? If you say he's going to be at achieving.land.keep, you know I'm right here. They've taken 3 meter by 3 meter squares and mapped out the world. Ford Motor Company will have this as their GPS system next year. Mercedes already has it. This will revolutionize school safety for evacuation, for unification sites where perimeters now can be miles. Where you're going to go, you can identify, here's where you're going to go for your evacuation reunification. It's a free app, but again, this is embraced by United Nations. It's really making a difference. Investing in research, 81% of the time, somebody else knew. We got to crack that code of silence. We got to get reporting systems that they're not accessible to students with disabilities and English language learners. We know that. We've got to get them in the mix so kids trial these systems, that we know that it works with them. So the reality, systems can be foiled. Crises are unpredictable. There's minimal oversight and accountability in most states. Safety devices aren't required to go through any testing or be certified. With mental health, we have partnerships and providers that can benefit children, but we don't have the solid research indicating what works and what doesn't. We have these service deserts too. So even if we had, if we had the dollars, we don't have the people for the positions. There's no profile of a student attacker, and exploration is a type of safety drill that improves situational awareness and threat detection. Instead of 400 kids, if we had 400 smoke detectors in our school, we'd want each one of those with a battery so they were actively detecting threats. Students are our biggest threat detectors, yet we've limited the roaming ranges and so much more, so they're really only focused on the small area in front of them. So here again is Kim's game. I don't know how many of those you remember. Now I'm not going to look back at the screen, but I think there was Uno for 10 cents, a pen, a pencil, orange golf ball, and so forth. These are great things, though, right? These are great things. So thank you so much for inviting me back to Wednesday night at the lab. It's been a blast. I continue to work diligently with a wonderful group of safety professionals to make our schools safer. Thank you for being here tonight. Good? Okay. All right. So now the presentation is done with Wisconsin Public Television recorded. So anything that you say won't be showing up on the recording. But first of all, thank you so much for being here. I mean, this
is being live broadcast, and that'll be on YouTube.
Well, first of all, thank you. I mean, for a July 3rd, I mean, there's so many things that are competing for your time and for you to make this a priority. This is my passion. I live for this. I've worked, well over 20 years in education and work with, I think, the best professionals in the school safety community. Thank them so much. But any questions, I'd be glad to field questions. I also brought business cards. I'm not selling anything, but if you do want to contact me, I can send you the PowerPoint. If this is something you want to, look at, some of the slides that I put together and things like that. But any questions? Okay, yes.
What's the best way to persuade the school board, school superintendents, the decision makers of a school district that safety theater is less useful than functional things like PA?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and the students in my class asked that.
Can you repeat it?
Okay, so the question is, how do you help your school superintendent or school board understand that the school safety theater approach of the full exercise intruders might not be as valuable as making sure that you have a robust public address system, right? So right away, one is with the drills, and this does work because I've had superintendents that go back to their boards and present this. Just as I indicated in the presentation, we don't do this for tornadoes and we don't do this for fire. So why do we do it for intruders? And that usually sparks the question of why do we do this for intruders and not for the other drills? And then it comes down to looking at a needs assessment. Who's doing your needs assessment? I encourage districts to call in their insurance carrier. Their insurance carrier will help them do a needs assessment, and they have a stake in the game, or they have a stake because they want the school to be as safe as it can. People don't do this, though, because they're afraid. They're afraid they're going to find something that's going to be a massive fix that's going to overwhelm them, or some deficiency that they haven't, attended to. That's usually not the case. Like, the insurance carriers have been really, really good with the schools. But to bring in the insurance carrier and just say, we need a needs assessment, and we want to include our public address system. We want to make sure all doors lock. There are still so many lockdowns where people will say, like, there's 3 doors that still don't lock. They don't lock. What do you do for substitutes? So any day where you have 10 substitutes, so that's where Ted Zacco, thanks for turning, I felt like Ray Beckman in Ghostbusters there for a moment, but the running drills, okay, running a drill and saying, how is our drill when we have 10% of our staff out? How do we do that? How do we measure that, the effectiveness of that? So that's where Bart Barda comes in. He has a number of drills. I'm working with Bart on my second book. My second book is about institutional review board, and that we should have IRB for all school safety drills K-12, flat out. So that's the premise of the book. And again, Bart, I'm working with also a school safety expert out of Texas, Ethan Barden. But yeah, that's where I would go. And it's a pretty simple process. And the needs will surface. It's not that that's hard, but it's the whole thing of, well, this is what people want to see. And I think to get through that too, that's a great point. I talked to a superintendent a few nights ago and I said, post on your website what your learning objectives are for safety for the upcoming year and then periodically give updates. Like we want to test, if we have staff out that people know what to do, that our induction process, that's almost exclusively what I do for consulting now is I just work with big districts in California on their induction process, making sure when they have new staff coming in. So yeah, and then of course, show us the research too. And people can't show the research because it doesn't exist. It flat out doesn't exist, but yeah. Yes?
Well, that's really my question. So that little sliver of research money was barely visible, but all the other technologies and stuff, the money was being spent on. If you had your way, how would you get more money into research and what would we be researching?
The Youth Code of Silence is what we'd be researching. So we know through Secret Service came out in 2002 with a study, FBI came out with a subsequent study in 2018, the National Threat Assessment Center, and then the Bethel Last guy talked about 20 plus students knowing. Students typically are aware or somebody else is aware that the threat is going to be carried out and then they don't bring it forward. So you're putting together models of trying to indicate what are the factors that make kids report. And so you'd have a whole scientific model to set that up. And a big part is focus groups. Everybody wants to do surveys, and that drives me crazy because surveys are one way and surveys do not access your students with disabilities. They don't understand the survey. And I taught students with disabilities. This isn't to degrade students with disabilities, but saying they're usually written at a 12th grade level. And I know this because I've looked at hundreds and I've run them through readability charts. And you can't ask clarifying questions. So focus groups, getting 6 to 8 students together, saying, what makes our school safe? And let's have that discussion. If somebody started here tomorrow, and how would you help them get up to speed on the way that school safety is done in our school? Those types of things. But the Youth Code of Silence, what is it? In my first presentation, it was money. We knew there was a threshold that if you got to a certain amount of money, kids would start telling what they knew. We've kind of gone away from that, but yeah, we're not researching, so we're just putting all this money into direct causes. But I would go full on that. Ted Zacco Hawkhalter from Columbine, with his kids, he said, Dave, that's where we need to go. We completely need to go there. Yes?
I have a question about the easy availability of weapons. And is there any, it would seem like common sense that take away the weapons and it's more difficult to have school shootings, but is there any hard data that shows one way or the other on that?
Yeah, it's a struggle to...
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Oh, okay, yeah, sorry about that. So the question was, if we don't have the access to weapons, do we have safer school environments? So that'd be correct summary. So,
is there research?
Yeah, is there research to that? And I haven't found consistent research that either supports that or doesn't support that. And even like the fact of gun-free zones versus not gun-free zones. And what happens is people interpret, for example, school violence. Let's say that there's a shooting that happens in a house across from a school as kids are coming to school. Well, they consider that part of a school shooting in some databases and not in others. So databases look very different from like every town to criminal statistics to other sources. So it's hard. And like, Chicago, southern Chicago has some of the strictest gun laws, but we know weapons are traced back to Indiana that are used in a lot of shootings in southern Chicago. So that actually is an area that I don't go deep into as a professional, because there are other people who center their practice to that. I center my practice more into research in the induction process and making accessible safety for kids, and then helping schools prioritize their safety needs. But it's a great question.
If you just rank countries by the number of guns in the country and the number of gun murders, it becomes very evident that if you don't have the guns, you don't have the mass deaths and the mass shootings. And I don't see why we can't control semi-automatic weapons, because I've seen many fights, and if all that people have available is their fists, not too many people die. But you give someone a semi-automatic gun, they can kill a lot of people very fast.
Right. So the statement was countries that don't have the prevalence of semi-automatic guns or just guns in general don't have the degree of gun-related death. I don't think there's an argument with that. I think that's an accurate statement that would need, obviously, that's a Second Amendment debate that would have to play out with that. The counter with that is in the Second Amendment debates, people will say Canada has more guns per capita than the United States. But yeah, I do, in my book, I don't address gun violence specifically in my book. Again, I kind of go into other areas, but you're right, that's, for intruders, the access in high volume rounds and things like that, it obviously makes sense that the more access you have and the more higher capacity rounds, the more fatalities you're going to have.
I'm just saying, I've seen guys try to kill one another with their fists, and it's not very effective.
Yeah. On the same day of the Sandy Hook shooting, there was an intruder in Japan, or not Japan, in China, with a knife who stabbed numerous people, but nobody died, I believe. There weren't any fatalities, so it's a difference of a knife, versus a gun. But yeah, I mean, realistically, if you do have a gun in a hallway that is a population dense area, you have a likelihood of a number of fatalities. So, yes, your question?
How does this apply to college campuses?
Okay.
Because I feel like when it's an elementary school, it's a very centralized building, and like when it's when I went to college, I stopped. There's no drills anymore. There's no any sort of safety that I see. So how would all these factors apply to a college campus? So
the question is, how does this apply to a college campus and promoting safety, especially from an intruder on a college campus, like a Virginia Tech? And the question is, college campuses are way behind on this. Well, the answer is way behind, significantly behind. I mean, I walked in the building today, and as I shared with Tom, it would take me 3 days to do surveillance at the different buildings to know who was coming in and out at what times, what was population dense, what wasn't. And if I was intent on carrying out a intruder incident, I probably would be able to do that. I mean, it would probably cost me my life, but I probably would be able to do that. Yeah, campuses, post-secondary campuses after Virginia Tech, the key cards, too, create situations where you can have responders locked out of buildings. And Virginia Tech also had a unique situation, I talked about it in 2013, that when the police responded, it took police a couple hours to clear the building, every room, and making sure that there weren't other shooters, other threats in the building before EMS and fire could access. So police were using their own Suburbans to transport injured persons to another site where police and EMS and other assets were. The vehicles were ruined. They were 2 weeks old. They had to be destroyed. But universities are wide open. We're fortunate that we don't have a trend of that going on right now. But if a trend did start, I don't know what would start it. I don't know what a legislation. I don't know how you'd fortify against that. To be honest, it's a massive concern.
I have a story to tell about that. I worked for a while at Washington University in St. Louis, and the idea there was everybody was supposed to get a text message or it would be on their cell phone, or it'd be on the computer, you know, that there was something going on. And we actually did have a shooter on campus at one point, and the holes were enormous. You could drive trucks through them. Like, the full professors got the cell phone messages. The adjunct professors got nothing because they hadn't been put into the system. People didn't know what to do once they got the message. They didn't know whether they were supposed to dismiss their classes, barricade the doors, and insist. It was total chaos.
And I think what you've said as far as and the message systems coming through, and we see this in schools with apps. So many people will enroll with the app, but then other people don't enroll with the app, so they get notices, and other people don't get notices. But you get informed of this, and then what do? Yeah, are you supposed to barricade the door? How do you know when it's safe, when the all clear, and when you barricade the door? Because in a true lockdown, so right now it's fascinating. Columbine. So again, my friend Ted, he said right now there's a referendum in Columbine, and I checked this out with their school principal. There's a referendum to replace Columbine High School, and the referendum is argued that they have 150 people per month go there as a destination site. It's become a tourist attraction in a dark way, but and they have to lock out the building, so they have a perimeter that lock out. They don't go lock down. But they want to replace the building and actually want to put it on the same campus, which to me makes no sense. I would totally relocate it somewhere else. Columbine, by the way, was a warehouse, and then it was reconfigured into a school in 1973 because it developed the area around it. In 1995, they did a referendum, did some upgrades, but the HVAC is bad. Part of the building, the foundation is giving way. It really should be replaced because of those issues, but it'll be replaced if it is thought that we're going to increase safety. So they're pitching this in a way right now saying, if we replace this building, we'll be able to make it safer. But as you said, what do people do? Yeah, what do you do? And it's situational awareness. It's those types of things like the FEMA search rating, where you have to think in the moment. You have to, I write about it in my book. I write about torus theory and chaos theory. And actually, we think chaos is scary and horrible, and chaos can actually liberate your thinking quite a bit to make very good decisions. And Chesty Polar of the Navy indicated that Operation Frequent Wind, the evacuation of Saigon, where they had to push helicopters over the sides of boats. Everybody got commendations after that for fast thinking. But yeah, you're right. At a university setting, I don't know, and it's not the area that I practice in. That's a perfect example, though. I don't know what would happen. I don't know. I can tell you this. I do know that the security, for example, at large-scale events, at the Cole Center, at Camp Randall, there are many, many layers of embedded security, and I've had access to some of those. Those are very secured venues on game days. But as we talk about just like today, or just when class is in session and just walking into the building, me with a backpack through and no checks, yeah. I mean, it's frightening. We have to have a trust in society, though, because at what point does everything become fortified? So, yes, gentlemen.
I get the impression from your talk that on the state level, there's no, the Department of Public Instruction has no guidelines or something to help schools in Wisconsin, or on the national level. Is there anything that is doing research or anything on this? I figure it's such a big thing, there should be some organization that would do that.
So the Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center does have a branch which focuses on school safety. Now you're right, though, in Wisconsin, the Department of Instruction, if you go to the website, school safety is really about school connectedness. It's about mental health. It's not about running school safety drills with learning objectives, which is my argument in the next book, is we need to have learning objectives for our drills. But yeah, there are a lot of things which people aren't researching, and I don't know why that is. I don't have an answer for what's going on. But the federal guidance is mesmerizing to me, especially. We've had Sentinel events, we had Columbine, but 1958, December 1st, 1958, 95 people died at Our Lady of Angels in a school fire, 3 nuns, 92 students toward the end of a day. And yet, we still have 7 states that really, as far as fire drills, they leave it up to the local communities to decide how many fire drills that their schools should do. And typically it's 2 if they do them, and they don't have to submit anything into the state to confirm that they did them. So until we have something out at a federal level, the states will just continue to muddle along with this. And we have no inter-rater reliability. Like I said, those 421 school districts in Wisconsin, I didn't want to go on air, but I mean really maybe 20 have this down where they have systems, they have induction plans, they practice their safety systems, they have people addressing this. Most of the districts are under 1,000 students. I work with superintendents of districts that have less than 100 students. Washington Island, Mellon, places like that. What do you do? So yeah, we're really we're missing the boat. And the money is there, but it's being spent on all kinds of crazy things, the bulletproof igloos. Tom wants to sell us a bulletproof igloo right now. I wasn't going to tell you, but that's his company. I kept it out of the show, keep things clean, no commingling of interest.
Andy.
My question is, we have an assault on education right now for finite spending. So we've been spending less and less money per student per capita for years. And so I think there's a finite amount of money. When is this craziness going to end? And when are we going to educate our students and not put the fear of God into them when they go to school every day?
Right. So I think everybody heard Sandy's comment. So the trend line isn't slowing down. So we saw the 257 bills. So I'm very outspoken in the book of saying this has to stop. It's not sustainable, and this isn't the way to achieve safety. But you're right. The same district who will lay off a teacher or will have 15-year-old textbooks will buy something like a brand new fence. This actually was a district in central Wisconsin, a small district of like 400 kids. Put all new fencing around, and they said it was for school safety. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. You're talking about laying off teachers and counselors and everybody else, and now you've put this in. But again, there's so much pressure. And Sandy, superintendents have told me, I don't want to move. I will get non-renewed by my board if I don't support this. And school board members, especially in these small communities, they feel the pressure from their neighbors. So a lot of decisions are being made because people are very panicked and they tune into the rhetoric. And yeah, it's horrifying because that 8th grade class that got denied the trip to DC, the message sent to them is, it's not safe. Reconnaissance is not safe for you. The environment's not safe. You need to be protected. That's the message that we just delivered. What do you think they're going to do when they're adults? Their kids aren't going to DC. So yeah, I don't know what your answer is because the funding, eventually there'll be some saturation level because we can't keep building and buying and buying and buying. But we are robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and it's a complete shame because we're further eroding the limited resources we have for academics. This is completely taking from that. If you put the two together, boards will always vote for the safety. And that's how schools are getting referendums passed, frankly. Look at the school referendums. They're passing at record rates in Wisconsin because people will also say safety upgrades. You tag that in, the referendum will pass.
One more question?
Yes, you've been waiting a long time, sorry.
I just wanted to see if I got this correct about your statistic of the 81% of the attacks are known by somebody.
Right.
And so I've listened to lots of programs on school safety. That's the first time I've ever heard that. It seems really compelling that you could, if you had people talking and trusting somebody, right, that you could, it seems like then you could prevent 81% of the attacks. So
which would be, I think, right.
So that would seem like the thing. And I heard people say, oh, this is a mental health issue. Why don't we call their bluff and say, is there anybody who has a voice? It seems like mental health professionals, teachers, and people who really realize that this is a situation would say, we gotta use this information.
Yeah.
Also, I'm curious how they got that information.
Okay. Well, the question was, how did we come up with the my statistic of 81% of the time somebody else knew. So I had that vetted through multiple sources before I came before you today. That was the latest statistic from the National Threat Assessment Center in 2018, and I talked to people who were involved in coming up with that statistic. You'll find similar numbers from a Secret Service report in 2002 that was like the summary of Columbine, and then there was an FBI one. But that number, I mean, when you do a presentation like this, you need everything to be vetted, the video clip and things like that, to make sure that it's accurate. But the Bethel, Alaska shooting, if you just type that in, that's amazing. I mean, some of the kids showed the student how to use a shotgun so he could carry this out from his grandfather's home. Took it off the wall, how to load it, how to practice with it, and then came in and filmed this. So you're right. This is, to me, it's so obvious. This youth code of silence, I write about it in the book, ways that we can tackle it. Focus groups are a great way. I've conducted focus groups, 6 to 8 students, have it transcribed. I'll go to huge districts, I'll do this and say, this is how you're going to find out what's going on. You'll build your connections. Everybody wants to do a survey. They're fast. Most surveys are junk. They don't have constructs developed. So, superintendent will say, Dave, we can get a survey together in 10 minutes and I can get it out. I'm like, you can't. It'll take you weeks to inform a survey with constructs if you're really going to do it accurately. And even then, it's still, if you have a focus group, you can at least get some data. But yeah, 81%. That sticks out to me too. We're like, yeah, 81%. So hypothetically, if we cut that in half, we could get half of these intruders down or wipe all of it out. But yeah, we just gloss over that. I mean, how does that happen? How does that absolutely happen? I mean, it baffles me. It baffles me. I mean, and like I said, there are places I can't, districts will say, we don't want you to come in. We don't want you to come in because we're fortification. We're full exercise, that's our thing. I'm like, okay, then that's fine. But there are a lot of districts that do want me and Bart Barda to come in and people like that and to just talk. Let's get our kids back from the sidelines of safety where we put them and get them back in the game. So.
Can I?
All right.
I bet it's true that 81% the time someone knew about it, but I would also think that there would be a lot of kids who would be threatening to do something who would never do anything, and that there would be an awful lot of false positives, just and sorting that out would be very, very difficult.
Right.
These kids are drama queens.
So that point comes in of right. So the question is, a lot of these threats aren't authentic. There's nothing behind them. So, but every threat needs to be investigated to the end. So this was like a great example, and I wrote about this, not in the book, but I wrote about this after the Notre Dame Cathedral fire. So when the alarm first sounded and the firefighter went up that was assigned to the facility, and he's going through the timbers, he doesn't find why the alarm sounded, so he just goes back down. Well, you can't do that. Like, you have to investigate it to the very end to see what actually caused this. But what principals will tell me is, Dave, we get hung up with the same kid we investigate 100 times a year because every day they're making a threat, and now we have to go through our whole threat assessment. It wears us out, it burns us out. How do we deal with this? I'm like, well, you have to do that. That is just part of what it is. It's a reallocation of resources then into your threat assessment. Now, most schools really don't even have a threat assessment. If somebody makes a threat of harm to self or others, they don't have a consistent way to deal with it. There is site-based management, discretion. A principal might just talk with somebody. What do they document? What don't they document? But yeah, it is all over the place. It is really all over the place.
All right, thank you very much.
All right.